All right, so I've been doing a lot of talking. My voice is tired, and I'm going to show a video. It's kind of fairly long. I'll see if we go through all of it. But we've been talking about normal, right? And like the normal student or the normal person. And this is a video that I really like that kind of speaks to how we think about this. And now I hope that everything's going to work the way that it should. Can everybody see like a screen? The captions are on. So I hope that everybody will have access. How are we with the sound? Just like up or down once I start talking?
Please welcome to the TEDx Sonoma County stage, Todd Rose.
It's 1952, and the Air Force has a problem. They've got good pilots flying better planes, but they're getting worse results, and they don't know why. And for a while, they blame the pilots. They even blame the technology. And they eventually got around to blaming the flight instructors. But it turned out that the problem was actually with the cockpit. Let me explain. Imagine you're a fighter pilot. You're operating a machine that in some cases can travel faster than the speed of sound, and where issues between success and failure, sometimes life and death, can be measured in split seconds. If you're a fighter pilot, you know that your performance depends fundamentally on the fit between you and your cockpit. Because after all, what good is the best technology in the world if you can't reach the critical instruments when you need them the most? But this presents a challenge for the Air Force, because obviously pilots are not the same size. So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit that can fit the most individuals? For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. Do you know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? It means no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. It doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile and you design a cockpit on average, you've literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem. And their response was bold. They banned the average. Meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average-sized pilot. And instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size. Meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, They wanted a cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow. Now, the companies that made these planes, as you could imagine, weren't happy, right? They argued and lobbied, and they said it's going to be impossible, or at least impossibly expensive, to build a flexible cockpit. But once they realized that the Air Force wasn't going to budge, suddenly it was possible. And it turned out it wasn't that expensive. And in fact, they made great strides, leveraging simple solutions that we all take for granted in our everyday lives, like adjustable seats. And as a result, the Air Force not only improved the performance of the pilots that they already had, but they dramatically expanded their talent pool. And today, we have the most diverse pool of fighter pilots ever. But here's the thing. Many of our top pilots would have never fit in a cockpit designed on average. So, most of us have never sat in the cockpit of a $150 million fighter jet, right? But we've all sat in the classroom. And I would argue I would argue that these are the cockpits of our economy. And I think we all know that we have some problems. We're spending more money than ever before, but we're getting worse results. Whether we're talking about declining test scores in math and science, or our dropout crisis, you probably know that we have over 1.2 million dropouts every single year in high school in this country. What you may not know is that at least 4% of those dropouts are known to be intellectually gifted. That means we're losing over 50,000 of our brightest minds every single year. So we know we have a problem. But do we know why? So far, we've been content to blame the students. We blame the teachers. We even blame the parents. But here's the thing. I think back to the Air Force example, and I can't help but wonder how much of this problem is just bad design. Here's what I mean. Even though we have one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world, and even though it's the 21st century, we still design our learning environments like textbooks for the average student. No kidding. We call it age appropriate, and we think it's good enough. But of course it's not. I mean, think about it. What does it even mean to design for an average student? Because a student is not one-dimensional, like struggling to gifted. Students vary on many dimensions of learning, just like they vary on dimensions of size. Here are a few obvious ones. And just like size, each student, every single one of them, has a jagged learning profile. Meaning they have strengths, they're average at some things, and they have weaknesses. We all do. Even geniuses have weaknesses. But if the fighter pilot example has taught us anything, it's this. If you design those learning environments on average, odds are you've designed them for nobody. So no wonder we have a problem. We've created learning environments that, because they are designed on average, cannot possibly do what we expected them to do, which is nurture individual potential. But think about what that really costs us. Because every single student has a jagged learning profile, it means that the average hurts everyone, even our best and brightest. Even for them, designing on average destroys talent in at least two ways. First, it makes your talent a liability. We all know kids like this. So unbelievably gifted, in one area, that their educational environment can't challenge them. We also know what happens. They get bored, and a shockingly high number of them drop out. The second way that the designing on average destroys talent is that it means your weakness will make it hard for us to see, let alone nurture, your talent. We all know kids like this as well. Like the kid who is gifted in science, but who is a below average reader. Because our science textbooks assume that every kid is reading at grade level, this kid's in trouble. Because for her, science class is first and foremost a reading test. And it's doubtful that we will ever see what she's truly capable of. Now, it's one thing when our technology does not allow us to do anything other than average. But it is a whole nother thing when the technology changes and we can do more, but we don't realize it. That's where we are today. In the last few years, education, just like the rest of society, has gone digital. If you don't believe me, just consider this fact. U.S. public schools are one of the largest buyers of iPads in the world, right? So the question isn't, do you want the technology? It's already here. You've already paid for it. The question is, what do you want it to be? And this is where it really gets exciting. We have a chance right now to use this technology to create learning environments that are so flexible that they truly can nurture the potential of every single individual. Now, you might think that sounds expensive, right? Doesn't have to be. In fact, we can get a long way. We can make great strides with simple solutions that we take for granted in our everyday digital lives. Here I'm thinking about basic stuff like language translation, support for reading, vocabulary, even the ability of a machine to pronounce a word for you or read a passage if you want. Basic stuff. But while these are simple solutions, you'll be surprised at how big of an impact they actually have on the lives of individuals. I know I was the first time that I saw it happen. I was observing a fourth grade classroom a few years ago, and they were participating in a study where we were testing the effectiveness of a new digital science curriculum. Now, I'll be the first to say, this new digital version wasn't fancy. In fact, it was pretty basic. The thing that it had going for it, though, was that it did not assume that every student in that classroom was reading at grade level. Now, one of my favorite things about this particular classroom was the teacher, because she hated technology. And I know this because it's the first thing that she told me when I met her. And my response was, okay, why did you sign up for a study that's about technology? She told me she was willing to go through this in the hopes that it might help one kid in her class. His name was Billy. And Billy, as she told me, had a mind for science. But he was one of those kids who was a below average reader. And she was hoping this might reach him now while he's still learning to read. Now I have to say, that actually made me nervous. Because as I said, this technology was pretty basic. And I didn't want to disappoint her. So you can imagine how pleasantly surprised I was. About halfway through the study, the teacher reaches out to say, hey, guess what? Not only has Billy taken to the technology, but I'm starting to see improvement in his performance. So that was nice. But nothing prepared me for what I saw when I went back to that classroom at the end of the study. Billy had become the de facto smartest kid in the class. No kidding. And everybody knew it. In fact, the first thing that I saw when I walked through the door were 6 or 7 kids huddled around Billy's desk, asking him questions about the assignment. And boy, did he have answers, it turns out. The thing is, all we really gave Billy and his classmates was the learning equivalent of adjustable seats. And in return, we got a glimpse of Billy's talent. And sure, you might say, well, look, that's one kid in one classroom. But then again, that's one kid in one classroom. And isn't that what it's actually about? Nurturing individual potential. Jonas Salk was one individual. He cured polio. What if Billy's the next Jonas Salk? What if the cure for cancer is in his mind? Who knows? But I do know that we came dangerously close to losing his talent before he even left grade school. Not because he didn't understand science, because he was still learning to read. And that's what I mean when I say that simple solutions can have a profound impact on individuals. So the real question to me is, how do we get these adjustable seats for learning in the hands of every student as fast as possible without spending more money? Here, I actually think the Air Force has given us the formula for success. What if we ban the average in education? We know it destroys talent. Instead, what if we demanded that the companies that sell these materials into our classrooms design them not to the average of dimensions of learning, but to the edges? It would be a bold move. It would certainly send a strong signal to the market. The game's changed. But trust me, if we do this, not only will we increase the performance of the kids in our classrooms today, we will dramatically expand our talent pool. Because right now, there are so many students we simply cannot reach because we design on average. Design to the edges, and we will reach them, and we'll get their talent. And I have to say, I know because I was one of those students. So today, I'm a faculty member at Harvard, but I'm also a high school dropout. It gets better. I was a high school dropout with a 0.9 GPA. For those of you that don't know, that's pretty bad. But here's the thing. I've been to the very bottom of our educational system. I've been to the very top. And I'm here to tell you, we are wasting so much talent at every single level. And the thing is, because for every one person like me, there are millions who worked as hard, who had the ability, but who were unable to overcome the drag of an educational environment designed on average. And their talent is forever lost to us. The thing is, we can't really afford to lose them. And the good news is, we don't have to anymore. I'm telling you, we have a once-in-a-lifetime chance right now to fundamentally reimagine the very foundation of our institutions of opportunity like education in ways that nurture the potential of every single individual, and therefore expand our talent pool, make us far more competitive in the world. We can do this. We know the formula, and it's time we demand it. Thank you.
So this is a little small, and I'll talk you through it. But, and I know that not everybody here is from OCC, but this is an example of the demographics of the students at OCC. So just to reiterate the fact that many of your students in your classroom does not look like you, does not necessarily think like you, their first language isn't English. You know, we brought up a whole lot of some of those challenges when we did the word cloud. And just as an example right here, so if you look at the educational history of the students, and this is actually last year's numbers, but like 18.6% of the students here at OCC are like studying for the first time. 3.1 are transfer students, 39.5% are continuing students, and 23.1% is concurrently enrolled in high school. The geographic distribution, 85% of the students come from out of Onondaga County, but 9.3% come out of Oswego, 2.5% out of Madison County. The average age of the students are, all of the students are 19 years. So that is, to me, that's fairly young. The age ranges from 21 and under, 70.5% of the students, but then, there's 216 students that's 50 years plus, and you might have some of them, in your class as well. And then the race and ethnicity is always something that's so important to me. Only 50% of the students here at OCC are white students. And just if we look around the room, I do not know everybody's ethnicity or race or how they identify, but the people that we have in this room does not correlate with those numbers. So to always think about the students in your class, where do they come from, what is their background? Now during the video also when he was talking, one of the things when they use words like exceptional students, and so I'm not that comfortable always with it because there's so many things that play a role. In South Africa, many times we have students in the classroom that if they have the equivalent of a $2 bill in their hand in the morning, they have to decide are they going to use that for bus fare or for food for the day. They'll use it for bus fare to come to campus, and then they don't have food to eat during the day. And if somebody is hungry, I get hangry. They can't think, they can't learn. So there's other things that we have to keep in mind as well. And yesterday, we had the conversation of, so whose responsibility is it, right? Is it the lecturer's responsibility to make sure that the student has eaten or, that the student has food? No, but there's support systems in place at colleges, at universities that address other things in students' lives. Residents' life, they look out for students also in terms of where they stay, what their living circumstances is, if when they live on campus. People pick up things about students all the time, but we don't talk to each other. And many times people don't even know where can they refer students if they're concerned about somebody's mental health, if they're concerned about do the student literally have food to eat or a way to get to campus. Maybe the reason why they're not attending campus is that they physically cannot get here for some reason. So to make use of that everything that is available for students on our campuses. Again, and I'm going to keep on saying this, UDL is a framework. We have to put in the meat around it. We have to put in the other parts because it's different for every class, it's different for every student. So I handed out a hard copy of the graphic organizer to everybody. I know some has some from yesterday, some prefer to access it digitally, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody has it. And so what you would have seen by now, because you had William showed some of it yesterday, is the way that UDL really works is basically on three principles that addresses three parts of the brain. And what we ask when we think about UDL is, why do students learn? What do they learn? And how do they learn it? Sounds fairly straightforward and simple, right? So if we keep on asking ourselves these three questions, and if you look at your organizer, you will see, let me just make sure that I get this right because I changed it around recently. The column on the left is your why column. The one in the middle is your what column, and the one on the right is your how column. And we're going to go systematically through all of that for the rest of the day, kind of until late afternoon. So if you keep on telling yourself, and the images on there is just to give you an idea of when you talk about why students learn, it's mostly the affect or affective network in their brains that's involved with that, right? When we talk about what they learn, it's the recognition part of their brain, and then how they learn is the strategy part of their brain. So there is some kind of method behind all of this, and it's not just that somebody decided, oh, these are the things that's needed. This comes from the neuroscience part too. So if we think about the why part, and you'll see, I mean, on the program we have like an hour for this, an hour for that. For those of you who know people with ADHD or have ADHD, time, doesn't work for us. So we'll get through all of it, but you'll see that I spend a lot of time usually on this part, on the why, because it's my personal belief, and I've seen it a lot, and I'm sure that you've seen it in your classroom. If somebody doesn't know like why they're learning something, I cannot for the life of me learn something or remember something if I don't know why I'm doing it, right? I mean, if your students aren't motivated, if they don't have a motivation for doing something, you know, whether it is because my father said so, but, you know, motivation is such an important thing. I'm very hard-headed. And if somebody just tells me to do something and I do not understand why, that 5-year-old that always asks why, I don't think I ever went past that stage. I want to understand why I'm doing something. And when it makes sense to me, man, then I can go with it. So the why part, and very interesting. So somebody asked yesterday, I think Rebecca, you asked about CAST. So CAST is the Center for Applied Special Technology, was the original name. But they don't use it, they just use the acronym anymore because it's kind of developed from there, and I'll give you all of their information. But they are the people who's really providing most of the resources and so around UDL, and it was really developed, and it will, I promise you, it will become a great resource for you. But when they first made this graphic organizer, it was actually, and I learn in colors, so it wasn't green, blue, purple, it was purple, blue, green. I think it was that way around. So they had the action and expression first, and then the representation, and then the engagement. And fairly recently, they changed that around. And that made me so happy, because I do think that you should first look at engagement. That's the first thing that you should look at. So, you know, we need to know why they learn, and they need to know why they need to learn this. I mean, how many times have a student asked you, why do we need to read this? Like, why is this important? This doesn't seem important to me. To put that in context so that they can understand why. Then, you know, what they're learning, in what format are we giving it to them? The recognition networks in our brains all work differently. If we just give it in a visual format, yes, those that can read well, those that can memorize well, good for them. But if you have somebody that's an auditory learner, that learns better with sound, if you have somebody that's a visual learner in terms of images and pictures, there's so many ways that you can present information, again, that kind of reaches for the same goal for people. So the second part, and that would be the second column, is what are they learning and how are we presenting it to them so that their brains can recognize it best. And then the strategic networks, that's the how. So that's the third principle, and that will be the third column on the graphic organizer. Unfortunately, I was saying the colors just now in the prints are in black and white, but in the PowerPoint, and so you'll see it's in color. But so how do they learn it? You know, do we just expect them to write tests? Hopefully we're past that point. There's so many different ways that we can evaluate somebody's learning, that they can give what they learned back to us. And how do we think about that? So there it is. That is UDL. Okay, we're done. No, but that's basically the principles of UDL in a nutshell. So if you always remember those three things, those three principles, and we're going to break it down now. But so it's about engagement, like why do they learn? It's about representation, what are they learning? And it's about action and expression, how are they learning and giving it back to us? And if you look at the bottom of the graphic organizer, it gives you your goals. So I don't know, and any of you can tell me right now if you disagree with that, but I'm pretty sure that we would want to have, I don't like the word expert, but that's a whole other conversation. But we want learners who is purposeful and motivated in our class, right? That would work if they're motivated. We want them to be resourceful and knowledgeable when they walk out of our classes. And we want them to be able to think strategically and be goal-directed. Because of all the things that we've learned about education, about learning, when you put those things together and it works, all of those things work together for somebody, they'll probably be learning at least something. So another way that they've now put the graphic organizer together, and I really like that, is that you can kind of look at it horizontally as well. So I pointed out the engagement, representation, and action and expression for you now. But what they did, and I really like these new graphic organizers, is if you look at it across then, first of all, we're creating access. We're creating access for the students. So then you can think, but why are we creating access? In which ways are we creating access that make them understand why they're doing it? How are we creating access in terms of perception, like how they engage with it, and in terms of their physical action? So that's something primarily that you as an instructor would do. That's primarily the role of the instructor. Then the next kind of phase is building, putting it together, right? So scaffolding, I think, is a word that many people who work in education know. So thinking about the different ways, when you think about engagement, representation, action, and expression, like how do we scaffold, how do we put this together? And there, I think traditionally, that task would kind of be the instructor or staff member. But remember Billy, right? Many times there's students that you can work with in your classroom that can help you also, and most of the students can help you to think about how to put these things together, how to build the material, how to build the class in a way that works for everybody. Again, using your resources. And then lastly, the last one is internalize. Yes, it's too small for me to read. How will the student internalize this? How will they take it forward? How do we create this expert learning? And that's mostly kind of with the students. How do we then know, and how can we see that the student has internalized this, they've made it their own, and therefore they can use it and they can move forward with it. So this little graphic organizer has become something that I have so many copies of that in so many places to remind me all the time. And this is really like a cheat sheet that you can use. It has the principles at the top that reminds you what are the different things that we're thinking about. It gives you the guidelines. So if you look now at the top with the access, when we think about engagement and we think about access, we think about options that we need to create to recruit the interest of the student. So that's the guideline. That's what you kind of want to be the outcome here, is that you're recruiting their interest. In terms of representation, you want to make sure that it is in such a way that you make provision for their perception. How will they perceive it? And then in action and expression, it is physical action. If you go to the building part, for engagement, you provide options for sustaining effort to keep them going, to keep them motivated and interested, and persistence. In terms of representation, you think about language and symbols, like physical ways that you are presenting it. And then in terms of the action and expression, you think about how can they communicate back to you. So that's the basic guidelines. And then the last one with internalizing, can students self-regulate? How can you provide ways for them to adjust, to reflect, and to self-regulate as they go along? Comprehension, how can you make sure that they've really comprehended what you have given them? And then how are they using their executive functions? And that's basically how we use the graphic organizer and the language that we use. So if we talk about the principles, we're basically talking about those three. When we talk about guidelines, it's the guideline for each, and then underneath that are checkpoints. Again, this is a framework. So it is not a recipe. It is not. Those that are there are suggestions, and I'll show you a little bit later. On the CAST website, you can actually get a copy of this that's blank, that it has the headings, but the blocks themselves are blank, so that you can fill in what works for you, so that you can put in there what would work best in your classroom, because not everything will work equally for everybody. And then, we have our goals at the bottom. So we know we're not going to try to use everything, because if you try to use everything, you're going to end up with a very cramped up classroom and a very cramped up class and syllabus where nobody can really, there's not much room for movement and there's not much room for flexibility. So always think about your outcome and your goal and what you're thinking about as you're working towards it. So we're not going to take a physical break right now. I just want to remind you to wiggle your toes and just don't sit and clench your teeth. Just kind of relax your shoulders a bit. I know this is becoming long. This is the hard part of it because it is the theory part. But we need to get through this, and this is going to help you to be able to look at the framework. So we're going to move straight into multiple means of engagement. And again, in terms of just setting what you can expect, we're going to talk about the guidelines, a little bit about the network, take you through what it's about, and I'm going to just show you briefly some examples of things that you can do. But again, it's all there in the presentation, and you can then go back and look at that when you're putting yours together. Okay. All right, so for every part of the framework now, our goals will pretty much be the same. I'm repeating it here, and it's going to start to sound very repetitive at some point. Just checking my time. But you want to, it's just kind of to remind you that you want to set your goals up front. When you're discussing something specifically, you want that agenda, you want to set your goals up front, because then everybody knows what they're in for. Then they're not sitting there and thinking, okay, what's coming next? So that is our goals. So now if we're breaking down the multiple means of engagement, we're thinking about why are our students learning? Why are they there? We want to recruit their, well, let's start at the bottom. We want to provide them with options for self-regulation. We want to provide them with options to sustain effort and persistence, and we want to recruit their interest, right? So we want them to be interested in what they're learning. We want them to keep going, and we want them to be able to self-reflect and to think about, like, why am I doing this? So that if they really don't want to, at some point they can say, okay, maybe I should make a change, right? So those are the three basic, as I said, guidelines that we work with when we think about the principle of engagement. So when we think about the affective network, like why people learn, the part in our brain that's activated with that is many times work with emotions, right? Students are emotional beings. Well, we all are. I mean, humans are emotional beings, right? So what is the significance of what they're learning to them? Why would they want to do that? Does it make them happy? Does it make them excited? Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, a lot of it is just to put bread on the table, to get a job. But how can we look at that in a way that makes it significant for them and that speaks to their motivation and their emotions? There's basic physiology behind it. There's many research that say if you're happier, if you're not stressed, and I think we've all might have experienced it at different times, it's easier for us to take in information, to learn, and to engage. Your brain and all the different networks from your brain regulate your heart rate, regulate your blood pressure. It physically regulates how you respond. So if you become all stressed out, what happens? What happens when we get all stressed out? You sweat. Your heart races. You can't concentrate. Right. And these things happen. It happens with us. It happens in our brains and in our bodies, and it also happens with the students. So our emotions are connected to like our higher order thinking in our brain. So if we can help our students to regulate, and again, it's not that we're not psychologists, right? We're not, every lecturer is not a psychologist, but there's ways that you can work with students and help them to engage with their work that can help them so that they can use their perception networks better, so that they can use their strategic networks better. And at some point, you will have to send them to somebody that can help them better. If they need additional assistance, if there's difficulty with drug use, and so we have somebody right here that that works with us and that can speak to that. There's many different support systems and so in places in our colleges and in our universities, and I don't think we utilize that enough. I want to show you a brief video about the influence that our emotions can have on us. I'm going to ask the interpreters if they wouldn't mind helping with some interpretation here, because sure, I don't know what happened there. Where did my video go? Help. Well, is that, what should we do? Want to turn it off? Do you want? I actually kind of want to let people see what it looks like when it's bad. Do you prefer them off? Okay, all right. So when you watch this by yourself, then you can see how bad it is. Okay. See, perfect example of making provision for everybody. So the sound down. Okay. All right. Do you prefer the captions on? Okay. All right. So we're going to find a way here to kind of make provision for everybody. I'm going to turn the sound down a bit. Let's go. Let's see. Give me an indication about the sound. Sound okay?
You're about to meet Michael. He lives fast as a self-made millionaire.
You didn't have to dress up. It's all right.
You're going to photograph Michael. He's actually saved somebody's life. Michael is an ex-inmate.
6 different people. So not everything I told you today was true. I'm not a fisherman. I am not an alcoholic. The GFC hit me hard, but I've never been a millionaire. Never been in prison. I am a Bondi lifesaver, but the story we talked about never did. Not psychic. Can barely spell it.
Before I knew there were different character pieces, I thought, that's really strange. These don't look like portraits of the character I thought you were. You always got your own preconceptions and got your ideas.
It pushed me into a position and a space that I wouldn't normally be in.
You have to dig a lot deeper. It means you've got to be, I think, a lot more creative to work out how you relate things.
So this is actually an ad for a camera that just kind of speaks to perception. But I find it very powerful in terms of when you, the information that you get about somebody and the assumptions that you make, right? So the information that you give your students can trigger certain emotional responses from them too, right? And that will influence how they then respond in kind. That the photos were, came out totally differently. Everybody had a different experience because they were told different things about the same man, right? And that's something to remember, that things that we talk about in the classroom, examples that we use, can trigger emotional responses from students sometimes. And to be aware of that, to be aware of just things that they could influence the way that they think, but then at the same time, what motivates them, what would get them going, what would be the thing that they would think, but I want to do that, or I want to know that, or I want to participate in that. In this case, the captions isn't as bad as it can be. There were some words that they missed, but there was no capitalization, there was no punctuation, and some of the words were wrong. In some of the cases with the automatic captioning, it's horrible. Specifically, I've made some videos for a class that I auto-captioned, the accent. So it came out pretty horrible. And then, if you upload something, you can go fix it yourself on YouTube, so I did that. But when it's auto-captioned, so don't assume when you have captions that that's going to be fine and that's going to be enough for the students in your class. Make sure that it's good captions, that it's proper captions, and not the automated ones can be okay. There's different ways, right, that we can kind of gauge the emotions of the students in our class. Use it, use the things that at the beginning of a class, put up emoticons, use Bowl Everywhere or one of these platforms, and say to the students, kind of put faces up there, like select a face, how do you feel today, right? To just kind of get a sense of the room and get a sense of like where your students are at. Yes.
One thing in science that we use is called the values intervention, and I'm thinking that this might be relevant for this moment. So we have found that students who think about their values and what's important to them before they take our class have a stronger rate of persistence. So you're engaging them, right, you're hitting that top recruiting interest part. So you ask them, what are the things that you value? And then you ask them right after that, why are you taking this class? So that they make that connection very intentionally. And I was thinking that one thing that would be good is to regularly be reminding them about their things that are important to them and how that's related to the class that they're taking. So that it's not just how they're feeling at that moment, but it's also, I really want to get a good job, or I want to go back into my community and make change. And that's why I'm in this class. So triggering that system, just an idea.
Thank you very much. That's a wonderful example. Yeah, sure. I'm flexible.
I I think that's great. And it comes back to what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about the appropriate or inappropriate responses to poll everywhere. There's a lot of research around cheating. Excuse me. There's a lot of research around cheating that shows that if you remind students right before they take a test that they're not supposed to cheat on the test or take, answers from the neighbor's example, really explicit reminders about cheating, then they don't cheat. So that idea of repeating the values and repeating it throughout the course, not just like at the very beginning when you introduce the course, I think would be very effective. And you can actually connect ground rules and values and motivation. I often have students do reflections around professional identity and thinking about how they think and questions of virtue and so on. But if you come to it again and again, it is an effective reminder.
Absolutely.
I had something as well. I want to direct attention to what you said about emotions and engagement. I've been teaching for 15 years now. And one thing that I have noticed is that when I'm having fun, they're having fun. When I'm excited about the subject, yeah, it's almost like it's contagious. They catch it. They catch my excitement and they become excited too. So I always try to aim for self-analysis first. How am I doing? Check in with myself about how I'm feeling. Am I ready to teach? And if I'm not, act. Do something, make believe that I am, whatever I have to do. But it's very important for the students to, because they pick up my vibe. So it's very important that I check in with myself.
Those are some amazing examples. Thank you very much. And this is a good example just of how much we can learn from each other. Right? We always think it's extra work, it's so much hard work, we have to do all these extra things now. But there's so many resources, and we are each other's resources also. That's one of the reasons why we give you the opportunity to work together with your projects here. Because some people choose to work alone, that's great, but if you want to work together, you're in the same departments, you can learn from each other. There's many different ways, that you can use apps and things, for students to just kind of say how they're feeling. I love there's a whole kind of psychology according to poo, right? I'm very much a Tigger. My husband's an Eeyore. It's an interesting combination. But you can make it fun, right, in terms of, like, where are you at today? How are you feeling? And it's not something that they have to share with each other because they might not be comfortable. But as Rebecca also said now, kind of reminding and just checking in. And if you think back about the video, sometimes it's the smallest thing. You might think it's kind of, English word, too small to, like, inconsiderate, insignificant. Thank you. I've used up my English words, I think. Like almost insignificant, but it could make such a big difference for somebody that you might not even realize. So to just remind ourselves also about that, as Michael said. All right, so when we think about engagement some more, remember, and I mean, I'm repeating a lot of things that we have talked about already. There's many things that can influence their affect. There's many things that can motivate them. There's many things that would challenge different students in different ways. I love Michael's example of when you're excited, the students will be excited. I mean, it's not necessarily equivalent, but I think there's so much truth in that. There's so much to be said for how they feel on your energy and how they feel why would they want to learn it if you seem to just be like going through the motions? How can we expect of them to want to learn what we're giving them when we're just like, okay, so today we're going to talk about, and I'm not saying that's what's happening. And we all also have our own lives, right? And we have our own things that we have to deal with. And sometimes, I don't know, I'm a big Brene Brown fan, B-R-E-N-E, Brene Brown. I'm not sure who of you know her, but she talks about the power of vulnerability. And I'm not saying now you all have to like be super vulnerable to your students, and so there's boundaries. Also, there's so many things that we have to take into account. But if you're dead tired and you just really don't think you can get through the class on that day, you know, you don't have to say to the students why that's the case, or you don't even have to say that is how you're feeling, but share just something and say, I kind of feel like today we need to just change the pace a bit and do something differently. And then, you know, that authenticity is something that students also pick up from, that you're also not always at your top and performing at your top. When they feel that they can't do their best and perform at their best because they're having difficulties, you know, if they see that every once now and again from you, they might feel more comfortable with it. All right, so there's so many ways and ideas and we're heading for lunch here, and we might be getting hangry. So I'm just kind of going to go through this. Again, we can spend a whole day on each of these, but this is just some ideas and examples of things that you can think about in terms of engagement when you want to recruit their interest. Some of these, to me, are kind of straightforward and almost logical, but then I'm making assumptions that what's logical for me would be logical for somebody else. So allow them to participate in the design of the activities. If you want to do something in a particular way, ask them for ideas. That gives them agency. They're participating. They get a chance to. You might have, you know, Billy, who's really good with technology and might not be a good reader. You know, pair them up in ways also that they can support each other. Have a variety of activities and not just one type of activity all the time, because some of them will be motivated by some and others by other activities. But in the end, it kind of all equals out. And they get to that point together. And, you know, create routines for those who need that so that you know kind of what's coming, so that they also know what's coming and that they can look forward to something also that they know that will be happening in the next class. As an example, you know, short videos followed by a chat, you know, with some prompts that they can discuss. Ask them to read an article in advance. That's something that they can do in different ways because you can give them different access. We'll talk about that when we get to that. And then, you know, they can talk about that with each other also. All right, so sustaining effort and persistence. Goal setting, help them to set goals or give them some guidelines to set goals and check in with them. How's it going with their goals? Because then if they're falling behind, you might be able to pick up that they're going to lose their motivation. They're going to lose because they feel they're not reaching their goals. Might need to adjust, might to refer them somewhere where somebody can help them with something if they need additional help. Just, you know, that whole, again, like check in with them frequently. Very briefly, just to make sure, and everybody set their own goals because their goals are not going to be the same. One thing that's extremely important, I did mention communities of learners a little bit, that whole kind of, sometimes they pair up naturally, and be aware of this kind of natural pairing. You know, you don't have to say, okay, you have to work with this person or that person. But when you see that they become friends or so, see how you can utilize that also, that they can motivate each other. But the last point there, providing feedback that encourages them, it's so much easier. I mean, it's so easy to say, no, that wasn't good enough. Or, you know, we're so used to negative feedback. We're so used to, with all the testing and stuff also, this kind of culture of kind of failing, and so has been, like when I grew up at least, also has been so kind of strongly in schools. But just that, well done, you know, just kind of highlighting something, even if it's the smallest thing that somebody did, just that positive feedback that can help them, you know, to keep going. you can, you can use this poll taking also, right? So that they can, and you can use different platforms for that. I know that recording sessions is not something that people are all that comfortable with all the time, but there are many people that do this, that record their classes and then post them, so that somebody who might have lost their concentration in the classes so can go back and look at it again. Sometimes somebody have difficult circumstances at home. Sometimes something is happening and going on with them and they miss a lot of classes. When you have the classes recorded, they can go back and they can see what they've missed in the class. I'm not saying that you should do that. I know there's a lot of logistics around, recording something. But this year, we are recording this for the first time, specifically also so that it can be used again. There's many different ways, there's many different benefits in recording something. You don't have to record your whole class. I think many of us are probably concerned about, I might say something that shouldn't be on record. But there's many ways, that you can do that. There are some suggestions of online technology that you can use in your classroom, also for chatting, for them to work together. The kids have phones in their hands all the time. So what do? We ban the phones, tell them to put the phones away, and so I think in this country with the laws and the stuff, there's all kinds of repercussions. But I know, like I was school in South Africa where the kids, when they come into the classroom, they each have a little box and they have to put their phone in there and it's locked away. Like, what the heck? They have the phones in their hands. Use it. If you're using the phone, like technology or an app or something that they can engage with in the classroom, they can't Facebook because they're busy with the app. They can't. And if they Facebook also, or whatever, they don't even do that anymore, Snapchat or whatever, it's their learning process. They're the ones that's going to, so if you can motivate them with using apps that actually helps them to learn, then they might just use that app instead of Snapchat, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Then you had them engaged for that 10 minutes. And then lastly, self-regulation. So again, the feedback part is very important. And it is good, there's many tools available also, visual tools and other tools that you can, because probably many of them never learned proper goal setting or ways, that they can kind of track themselves. There's apps for that as well. You can use visuals that they can set up themselves. They can set up together at the beginning of the class for the semester or for however long they're in the class. Something like what you did here also, like kind of like a pre-assessment or like a before the classroom, to get that information from them. They keep a copy so they know where they were at the beginning. You get a copy so you have an idea of where everybody is in the beginning. And then as you go along, you can check in with them and ask them, where are you at? And if you see they struggle, you can refer them to somebody that can help them, or you can look at different ways, additional work, pairing them up with somebody, or something that you can do to assist them. So just helping them to regulate themselves. Yes?
You mentioned that there were apps for, so for those of us who don't know a ton about instructional technology, is there a way for you to tell us what some of those might be, or send us some suggestions? Any of that is great.
Thank you so much. I actually forgot about that. I have and I'll upload that on Blackboard for you. It's a beautiful thing. It looks like a wheel, like the color wheel, and somebody somewhere thought of that, like for different tasks and different things that you want. It's like kind of each little pie piece in the wheel, and then there's pictures of the actual apps, and also then the names of the apps. And I'll upload the one that's live that you can just click on that and it'll take you to it. Because I know that, and another thing also is ask the students, right? They know what they use. I know of someone, and I'll try to go look and see if I can find that story, that physically used Snapchat.
I'm sorry, Hestie, can you clarify, what does the wheel actually do?
Oh, it's like a graphic organizer. So it shows the, so it'll be something that you can refer to for resources. So each like pie would represent, say, for like group work would be one pie, and then there would be the names and the symbols of an app that you can use for that in that little pie piece. And then if you click on that, it'll take you to that app for you as an instructor as resources, so that for people who don't know the apps and the things. Okay. So I'll put that in Blackboard for you.
I'm curious. I was kind of surprised when you said yesterday that Blackboard was not really accessible. So I'm thinking, as we're building all this stuff, is it really helpful? I would be very curious what the issues in Blackboard were.
Thank you for that. Chris, yesterday when we were saying that, Chris was like, what? Blackboard's not accessible? So it's mostly some of the issues in Blackboard is, so if you think of, and there are some tech people, I think here, and like instructional design people, if you think about Blackboard, like how many times you have to click on something to kind of get, you have to open the class, then you have to click on this, and that, it's specifically for screen readers, for people who use screen readers, or for people who have difficulty processing complicated information, like following, because there's so many, I think and I wish my academic advisor was here, he's like a assistive tech guru, but I think they say like between 2 or 3 clicks, you should get to where you want to be. And Blackboard just doesn't make that, it's just not set up as a platform. I know they've been doing work around that. Also, so it's more kind of processing. If you load up documents that is accessible, that should be fine, like in Blackboard. And the new ally function that is available, I know OCC was going to buy it. Laurie was working on it last year, but then I think they didn't end up buying the license. I'm not sure. But there is a function, SU is using it in Blackboard, where you can check the accessibility. So in many cases, it is that it's kind of, the process of it is tough. And many of these apps has actually been developed specifically for that, so to make it easier. And that's what this pie chart does also. It also will say, so it will say, this app will work, say, for meeting or for setting goals or so. And then it actually says this works better for somebody who's a visual learner. It won't work for somebody who's, so it kind of describes also who would it be a best choice for. And that's also why you kind of need to know who you have in the room, right? So that you know what would be the best choice to make. Apps are actually, and just technology is becoming so pervasive that it's kind of becoming, the circle's going around, and it's becoming negative again if you don't kind of use it right. So there could be some that is not accessible, but in this specific graphic kind of organizer should be very helpful. And thank you for asking that, because I totally forgot about that. And I'll definitely upload that on Blackboard. But the students are such great resources in terms of what they use. It really is, it's usually very good just to ask them. Okay, I think we're at time, a few more minutes. All right, but I'm getting hangry. So there's different things that you can do. And I want to give you just a few minutes to just talk with each other, either those of you who are working together or those of you, and if you don't want to do it now, that's fine, but I want you to just think about all of these things that we talked about right now, about engagement. So one thing, a small thing that you can do that has kind of resonated with you today, and just share it with each other, specifically in your classroom, or if there was something that was just like, never thought about that, just to kind of tie it in there for yourselves. And we have about 5 minutes before lunch, so if you can take that time. If you're too hungry, then I'll understand. But then, and I'm not going to open this right now, I'll click on it real quick so that you can see. Yeah, we're going to break. And this is in the PowerPoint. So CAST, as I said to you, now I'll give you all of these resources towards the end also. It's in the presentation. They have this, it's called UDL on Campus, where you can go there and it gives you different examples of different possible challenges that you might find. Okay. So for instance, there's an example of, there's a music theory one too. This was like in construction management, and it'll give an example of saying, it's similar to the little examples that William used yesterday. He's just way more creative with that. I just go to what is there. But so this says, Mr. Brian Wheeler teaches primarily to second semester freshman construction management majors. The course is composed of 3 contact hours of lecture and 2 contact hours of lab per week. Then it gives you the challenges that he's identified, lack of student engagement, limited student understanding of the course, student engagement in the labs. Then it tells you which networks is involved in that and what can you look at to provide multiple means of engagement and action and expression. And these are real examples. And then it says, what did he do? So in terms of engagement, he, to heighten the interest and support, progress monitoring, he used multiple examples of actual job site experiences during the lecture and the lab. He provided students with hands-on safety and method training and implemented a team competition design project in the classroom. In the classroom, he used a circular seating arrangement to promote discussion and interaction. So it gives like real examples of what he did. And then it gives the outcomes. Students were extremely motivated and engaged with the competition design project. I am not always pro-competition, but if that worked, great. They responded positively to the changes. They were supported and engaged when they're completing these scaffolded handouts that's discussed in the next one. So these are really great and nice examples. We'll go through some more later. There's like music teaching examples. There's like that one is a criminal justice one, and so CAST has really over the years have developed this amazing resource, cast.org, cast.org, but all of that is provided in the PowerPoint, where you can literally click and see examples in course design, examples in media materials, examples in many different things that you can connect with. I just always caution people that it's not a recipe. What worked for one person is not going to work for everybody, but it is a great resource to use if you're looking for examples, just to if you get stuck and you want to like bounce ideas off of, or just get some ideas somewhere to get your juices flowing. All right, that was enough talking for now. We're going to break for lunch, and we'll be back here at 1. And then we're going to talk about the representation and action and expression. That is there's a lot of nice concrete examples, but the most important part was up to now in terms of engagement, because as I said, if your students aren't engaged, if they're not motivated, then you can give them 20 different ways of engaging with the material. You can give them 20 different formats of it. They're still not going to want to do it. But we'll talk about the practical examples of how you can adjust the material and the stuff in your classroom after lunch at 1. Thank you.